This sale impacted me individually a lot more than it impacted kind of anyone in my life.
Boris Berenberg. He thought he hit the jackpot selling his bootstrapped cash-rich software business. 2 years later, he's filled with bitter regret. In this candid episode, Boris gets real about his exit, what he wishes he knew then, and what we can all learn now.
If you can think of something that you could do wrong, I did all of it wrong. You don't have to be great. You just have to avoid enough mistakes. There was the category of people that went on to found something else. And then there were the founders that became alcoholics. The whole reason I want $25 million in a bank account is so it spits off the interest, right? So it means that you don't actually care about the 25 million, you care about the interest, which is cash flows. There's so much bullshit in the United States, but it is so much less than every other place that I go to.
Hi, Boris.
Hey, Mr. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for joining me today. You know, in this podcast, we focus deeply on what happens after a founder sells his or her business. So my first question to you, how long ago have you sold yours?
Almost 2 years. It was May 2nd, 2022. That was the final close date on the transaction.
Fantastic. I would say congratulations, except that I know for a fact that you actually regret selling.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear your reasons for that.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a longer article on it. So, if someone wants to Google my name and I regret selling my startup, they'll find it. But
I will post a link to it in the comments. It's a fantastic article. I really recommend everybody to read it.
Yeah, I think that the main reason why I regret it is because I have lost my kind of self-definition of who I am as a result, right? I think everyone defines themselves differently. Some people define themselves, as a husband, right? Other people define themselves as a parent. Other people define themselves as, a marathoner. And I defined myself as a CEO and founder. And so when I sold the company, there was a very large gap left in my life. And, I've been struggling to fill that, right? And I mean, when I sold the company, I was very confident that I had a very specific thing that I was going to work on. And I did. And it went very, very well until the market tanked. And in the fall of 2022, my new idea, which was a very, let's say, high budget item that I was working on, all the buyers basically got laid off and fired. And so that went to nothing. And then since then, I've just kind of been stuck trying to figure out what it is that I want to work on and, not having that strong pull. And it's a morass of emotions and opportunities and feelings and risk and all this other stuff, right?
In your article, you also talk about the financial side of things and why purely pragmatically it was not necessarily a good decision.
Everyone sells a company for a different reason. Mm-hmm. I sold it because I had parts of the business which it's not that I even disliked doing it, I just hated it. Right? It was like this dread of oh man, I have to deal with X again. Mm-hmm. And it had been a thing that I'd been dealing with for, even before I started the company because it was an external issue. And after a decade of it, it felt like I was kind of almost in an abusive relationship. And at some point, you have to leave, right? And I was like, okay, I'll get enough money and I'll go work on this other thing. And I know everyone wants this other thing and the market's happy with it and blah, blah, blah. Right. And so in terms of the financial outcome, first world problems, right? I'm doing very well. let me start by saying that, right? I'm
happy to hear.
Yeah. I am, in a very good financial position compared to pretty much anyone in the world, except a very, very tiny minority of individuals. Mm-hmm. However, I am also not in a good enough position where I can sit and never work again, right? And there are plenty of people who have sold companies who do fit into that category without ever becoming billionaires or anything like that, right? Like, you know, and I can even tell you that one of the things I've been figuring out is like, there's this term of a fuck you number, right? So like, what's the fuck you number? And the fuck you number that I figured out is $25 million roughly, right? And the reason why I say that number is very specific. It's, I say $25 million with a 4% rate of return, right? Gives you $1 million in passive income per year. Government's going to take half of it, leaves you with 500K, 250K to like live a, good life in New York, and then 250K a year for like experiments, fancy trips, whatever, like to live an exceptionally good life. I think that this is this is like the amount. And if you account for inflation and all these other things, it really is kind of like the minimum safe number if you want to just like stop working now at, I'm 35. So if I want to stop working now, that's kind of what I figured out. I'm not there, right? I can tell you that. So yeah, I think that having, sold the company, and B, since selling the company, having better understood how one should sell a company, right? It's made me kind of more aware of just how much money I had left on the table, right? And how much, like, forget even like waiting 2 more years to sell, right? Or this or that. It was just like, I did a bad job of hiring legal representation. I did a bad job of hiring financial representation. I didn't run as aggressive of a process as I should have, right? Like, if you can think of something that you could do wrong, I did all of it wrong. And so, yeah, financially, it's also not as good of an outcome as I'd hoped. And, when there's any kind of an exit, you immediately become a target, basically, right? So from, marketing stuff, right, where like, after the exit, I immediately got harassed by every single wealth manager in the world, right? To, people who think that now they can sue you, to whatever else, right? And so, especially if you don't have like a great exit, right? Like you become a target, and now that money is even more at risk. And I think in the article, I mentioned this concept of like what I call dragon mode, right? Which is like, you read a book or like you watch a movie and there's like a dragon sitting on his pile of gold, and you're like, well, why does a dragon need a pile of gold that he just sits on, right? And it's like, once you've sold a company, or I would assume that even people who just inherit money, right, have the same problem where they're like, okay, I have this pile of money and now I have to protect it. And it's not just a case of going out and adventuring for more gold, which I looked at your history, and I guess you've exited 5 companies now.
Well, 4.
4. Okay. 5th one coming soon, probably.
Not all exits were equally great. So
right.
They were very different. I've learned my lessons and made my mistakes for sure. I can relate to a lot of what you're saying.
The funny thing about advice, right, is that all advice that we hear is like very trite. It's like, work hard, right? Like, be honest, right? Like this kind of thing. And you're like, oh, it's all useless. And then after you go through all the mistakes, you're like, it's all correct. That's all the advice that's really out there, right? It's this trite stuff of like, get good lawyers, get good accountants, right?
I totally agree with you. It's quite a funny phenomena that we all know what to do. We all know what's right, what's wrong, but actually internalizing it enough to act on it or having enough conviction is hard. And that's why we keep learning lessons from our own mistakes instead of other people's mistakes. I'm absolutely with you on that one.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of like audiobooks and business histories and podcasts on these topics, and I'm trying to basically turn it into a situation where I hear it enough times that maybe I internalize just a little bit of it, right? Just avoid a couple fewer mistakes, right? It's like the old Mungerism of like, you don't have to be great, you just have to like avoid enough mistakes, kind of thing, which hopefully I'll get better at.
I was writing a blog for a long time, and one of the reasons I started doing a podcast is because I realized that when people actually see another person sharing their mistakes with them emotionally, that creates a very different level of conviction than if you read the text, which is much less personal. So I love that, your face shows quite a lot of emotion about your lessons, because that is exactly what helps people get the message.
Yeah, I mean, even with the blog post that it got on like the front page of Hacker News, and I was reading the comments, and I was like trying to stay out of the comments as much as possible, because people were attributing a lot of tone and emotion and things to what I had written that I hadn't, right? Like I avoided talking about how much the exit was for, right? I avoided talking about, aspects of my personal life that I've mentioned here. And there were like, I did go into like one comment and kind of responded, and I was like, hey, I'm not saying like my life is bad because I sold a company. My life is great.
Right.
Like I, have like, I'm not in a situation where the acquirer is, some bad company that's treating me poorly. That's not the case. They treat me very well.
Yeah.
I have a lot of autonomy in the new organization that I'm in. I have the freedom to, try build things in my spare time and nights and weekends. I, have a good partner. I have a very healthy relationship with my family. I get to travel a lot. Like I have a great life, right? It's just I have a gap in it also from like this internal perception of things. And yeah, hopefully the that comes across a bit clearer here than in my writing.
For what it's worth, my first exit was 13 years ago, and I talked to hundreds of people who exited businesses. And this regret is usually a very temporary thing. And then you move on, and then you look back at it with a lot of gratitude that your exit taught you so much. So
Yeah.
the sadness will go away, I'm sure.
No, I'm confident it will, right? Like it's this beauty of how our brains work, of like we rewrite the past to romanticize it, right? I always say it's like I got engaged when I was 18, and long story short, let's say she cheated with my friend. And at the time I was heartbroken. I literally, like, I've been working in tech already by the time I was 18, and I, for like 2 years, something like that, maybe even 3. And at that point I was like, oh, I'll just like get another tech job. I'll move back home, whatever. And I couldn't do it. Like I was like completely broken. I ended up washing dogs at PetSmart, which if anyone is like seriously depressed and like finding, can't afford therapy, go get a job at PetSmart washing dogs. It is highly effective. It is like getting paid for like, therapy basically. But, and I look back at it now and I'm like, oh man, like that was such an important growth moment for me. Right. And it pushed me to change my behavior in many ways. Right. Because like, I get why she, cheated on me and left me. Right. Like, I was pretty shitty at the time. I'm still not amazing, but I was much worse then. So I think in the same vein that this experience will kind of get rewritten in my mind of like, okay, well, I learned all these lessons, right? I'll build something else. And
What would you do differently if you could turn back time?
oh, everything, absolutely everything. It's again, like I outlined a lot of this in the blog post, but I think the first thing is, before even considering selling, right, is I would restructure how I thought about running the business. So I started by saying, okay, I want to do X, right, with X being like not deal with the people who I didn't want to deal with. And I was like, so the solution is throw everything away so that I don't have to like deal with them, right, and take the money and then try again. And like, that's a very extreme solution, right? And instead, I think what I should have said is like, hey, here's the thing I want to do, right? What is the minimum I actually need to do to achieve it, right? So for example, hire a CEO, right? Like that could have been the minimum to achieve it, right? Like hire someone to be the CEO, check in with them once a month to make sure everything's on board, use the free cap. And just for context also, my business was 100% bootstrapped and very cash flow positive, right? So it was like, had plenty of money to do whatever I want with, had no investors that I had to go and, appease, anything, right? So like could have just hired a CEO, let them kind of run it, whatever. Could have hired, the business had different parts of it, and it was really just one, well, let's say 2 out of the 3 parts that I didn't want to deal with. I could have hired general managers to manage those parts of the business, right? I could have gone to therapy and talked with a therapist about my emotional problems of dealing with like the parts of the business, right? I could have hired a business coach. One of the downsides of not having investors was there was no board, right? So there was nobody to call me on my own BS, right? Like I was the end all be all. So I could have hired a paid board, right? Whose job was to challenge me and hold me accountable and all these things. You know, I could have sold part of the company and not all of it, right? I could have run again, like I could have hired better finance, representation throughout the sales process. There's like the spectrum of everything I could have done is literally everything other than what I did, because I took such a extreme and narrow kind of approach to solving things.
So in that article of yours, you also mentioned how you didn't fully understand what your values were, and how
Yeah.
when you did understand your values after you sold your business, you realized that you shouldn't have sold it.
Yeah. So the values thing actually came out of something different where I had something going on in my personal life after I sold the company, went to a therapist, started working with a therapist to deal with this unrelated personal stuff. And the therapist was kind of like, hey, how do you benchmark your own decisions against, yourself? And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, make a decision, well, think about it, what feels right. And he was like, okay, yeah, that doesn't really work super well. You may need some kind of guidelines, and guidelines that you would review it and assess over time and understand, like, are they still actually your guidelines or not, right? Because it's very easy to trick yourself situationally. And so he gave me this exercise, and the exercise is it's a sheet of paper with a list of, I want to say, 30 or 40 or 50 values that are commonly held by individuals, and that you pick the top 10 most important, you ignore the rest, and then you take those top 10 and you stack rank them, right, in terms of importance to you. You'd think like, oh, why not just stack rank all 50? Stack ranking even 10 takes a surprising amount of time. I think it took me a few hours in multiple multiple 30-minute increments, kind of like to restack rank, restack rank, restack rank. I kept doing it on different flights I was on, actually. But it's amazing how clarifying the process is of what you give a shit about and how much relative to one another, right? Like, how much do you care about friends versus family, right? Different for everybody, right? How much do you care about wealth versus power, right? How much do you care about power versus recognition, right? Like there's all these things that, are very personal, and stopping and asking yourself to understand why, like, what do you actually value and why does that, matter? And for me, what happened was I had these top 10, right? And I looked at them, and selling the company, I think, impacted negatively 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
And I was even teasing my partner the other day. She was like, what would happen if we broke up? I'm like, yeah, that would impact one of my values, right? And selling the company impacted 4 or 5. So like, think about like the psychological harm that happens in a breakup, right? Versus like, imagine if it was 4 to 5 times worse than that, right? Like that's kind of the degree of impact that it had on me. And unfortunately, I'm very lucky that I have good management tools at my disposal, right? So, and it's again, like we were saying, it's the basic things that we all know, right? It's like, go talk to a therapist, work out, eat healthy, sleep consistently, right? Like spend time with friends and family. Don't drink, don't do drugs, right? Like it's pretty well understood set of things. Yeah, so I've been able to manage it, I think, pretty effectively. But I think actually in the group that you and I are both in is also Patrick Campbell, if I remember correctly, is his name. I remember his like Twitter, I think, is Paticus, but he's the co-founder of ProfitWell. And I listened to a podcast with him where he went through the sale of his company. And, they clearly somebody much smarter than me, because he's like, oh, before selling my company, I did research on the process of selling companies and what happens to founders. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And he says, he's like, there's two categories of founder that he found. There was the category of people that went on to found something else, or like work on something else really important to them.
Yeah.
And then there were the founders that became alcoholics, or like abusing some kind of substance. And he was like, that's it. There's like,
It's a very pessimistic view.
maybe he'll hear this and be like, no, you totally misunderstood what I said. But that's how I remember this segment. And so it's a reminder to me to like you have to keep it on the straight and narrow, or you burn down the rest of your life.
Okay, I'll invite Patrick to my podcast and we'll debate the.
Yeah, we can have like a talk back, right?
I like that.
Yeah.
So Boris, going back to the time when you started your business, what was your motivation?
So I was working for a company, and they were making decisions that I was not in agreement with. And I felt that they were violating both the company values and good business practices, and all this other stuff, right? And I was completely ineffective at getting even teams to listen to me, forget the company as a whole. And so my manager at the time kept being, saying something along the lines of like, if you think you're right, like, why don't you quit and start a company and prove us wrong? Right? Like it was this kind of thing. It was like, I was a bad culture fit there, right? So I think he was trying to very politely be like, hey, we want you to quit. But I was doing good work, but I was a bad culture fit. So they were like, you can leave anytime you want, but until then, like, please focus and do the shit we care about. But it was literally a lot of that, right? So it was a lot of that. And then eventually I did quit, and I didn't start a company. I went to go work for like in-house for similar stuff that I was doing before. My salary went up. I ended up at a Uber, small company. No one's ever heard of it. And I was on the most amazing team of my life. And the team was, I think, 4 of us. And we did not even need to communicate. That's how well we understood the subject area and each other, right? I remember there was one occurrence where like some news thing came out, like very important that we had to deal with. And this was like an 8-page document, right? Like, and we did not have to discuss it. Everybody knew like what everyone else thought. Everyone knew what they needed to do. And it was just this like, it was a really, really amazing like team I was on, probably the best of my life. And I was working probably like 6 hours a day. Like it was very easy hours. It was 100% remote, living in New York. The team was all over the place. And I just realized that was it. I, at 27, had reached the apex of my career. Like if I took a different job at any other company, or even moved, like to get a promotion, I would have had to take my boss's job. Not my, there's only one role, right? There were 3 of us reporting to him. So like the chances of us getting it are low. And if I moved into a role somewhere else within the company, my pay would decrease because I provided a lot of value, kind of as a niche contributor. And I was like, shit, there's literally nothing else. Like, that's it. I have quite literally reached the apex of my career financially and in terms of everything else. And I was like, I just got to start my own thing. Like, I was like, there is no way up unless I do my own thing. And I started by finding consulting customers to work with nights and weekends. And then once I had lined up about, I think, $70,000 of consulting income for the coming year, I gave notice. And so I knew that so $70,000 was roughly, I think it was about 25 to 50% of my time was taken up for the coming year with that. And so I knew that like 70K was enough for me to live on. And then I still had half my time free every week to like find more customers and grow the business, etc. And so that was it, right? Like it was like I had enough security in terms of income to start, and I had free time to grow, and I also had the confidence that should the business just like, let's say I start working with the customers, I do a terrible job, I lose them in the first couple of months, right? Like, I also knew that my skill set at the time made me extremely hireable back into this type of role that I had before. So I knew I could probably find, an in-house job within a few months at the time. And so I was very confident that it was a fairly low risk, high reward activity.
So basically, you wanted autonomy and you wanted to grow rather than, for example, prove yourself or have financial freedom.
I think it would be a mixture of things, right? I think very much a chips on shoulders, put chips in pockets kind of situation, right? Where like I'd been arguing with people for a long time saying like, hey, there's like the Google way of doing customer support, which is like the fuck you, we're not doing support, right? And then there's the like, I'm blanking on the name right now. It's one of the hotel chains is like famous for, the staff at the hotel are authorized to approve anything up to $500 in expenses to make like a guest happy without like any management oversight or anything. Like any employee on the floor can do it. And like there's a sliding scale of everything in between. And I was like, we need to be more like, we're working with enterprise customers, like B2B SaaS enterprise customers. I'm like, we need to be much more in the like bend over, make them happy, and treat them in a much more respectful way. And not only in the like way we do support, but also in the way we develop the product itself. And they just culturally, they just didn't want to do that. So a lot of it was me saying like, hey, I want to prove that my way is right. That enterprise customers highly value a high touch, high service model of support for this stuff. There was this element of like proving my own thinking right. There was also the element of like, hey, I want to grow my status socially, right? Because like saying like, hey, I'm a support engineer or whatever, right, is like pretty low status. To saying like, hey, I'm a founder CEO is pretty high status. So I think a lot of it was me chasing social status. A lot of it was chasing money, right? Like the business, like I always find it funny when people are like, we're building a company to change the world. And I'm like, yeah, there are some of those, right? But for like a lot of B2B SaaS stuff, we're here to make money, right? Like I know that like, Slack is like, we're connecting, work or whatever. I don't know what their slogan is, right? But like everyone has these like nice slogans, but ultimately like, let's be clear here. And for me, like I said, I had felt like I had reached my financial cap. There wasn't a clear path to how I was going to make more money. And autonomy, like you said, I've never had a particularly good experience working for somebody, right? They've usually not had a particularly good experience employing me. I've never in my life had gotten promoted. Not once. I've changed titles by switching jobs. I've gotten demoted, especially now after selling the company. But I've never gotten a promotion, right? Which I think will tell you kind of like I'm not good at working at someone else's set of ideas and ways of working, etc. And I have kind of my own thing, and working towards that autonomy is important for me.
Are you now working at the acquirer?
Yeah. And one of the reasons why it's working for me to work there is that I have almost 100% autonomy.
Okay.
The only autonomy I don't have is that I have to set, financial targets and report those to the CFO and then provide updates on how we're trending towards them. But that's about it. And I get asked to go to some meetings. But outside of that, right? Like I fire whoever I want, however I want, I guess I don't have control over comp scales for my people. That is one thing that I don't have. But largely, like it is a level of autonomy that is probably nearly unheard of in companies of this size, and they are very understanding of how I want to do things, and are even interested in working together to see how I can expand influence on other parts of the company to kind of try and get them to learn from how I do things.
How many hours realistically you spend a week working?
I don't know if I should say that.
You don't have to. It's okay.
I try, and I would say this, right? Like the way that I work is very, very clear in my mind, right? Which is first, I do all of my obligations to my employer. Second, I do all of the obligations in my personal life. So for example, I've been remodeling a house right now. So The amount of time I spend running back and forth to the house to see how the building is going and deciding on materials and all this stuff, I could not have imagined how much time that took. And then finally, like in the evenings and stuff, I will spend some time building new things to see kind of like, is this something I should be working on? How should I be working on it? Right. Like, and then after that, then I also do some self-promotional stuff like recording this type of podcast on a weekend or something. I don't know how you classify work, but I would say I probably work somewhere between 40 and 80 hours a week across all the different things I do. And there's also like times of intensity, right? Like we have a conference that we're going to in end of April, right? So that's going to be, probably like 14, 16-hour days for the entire week, right? Including the weekends, because there's going to be events around it, right? Like even while you're there, you still in the evening need to get your primary emails and stuff done, and et cetera, right? So it's all over the place. I think one of the things that I'm lucky with is that at some point I really learned to, I wouldn't say enjoy work, but I feel like I'm not using my time well if I'm not working, right? And like maybe it's workaholism. I don't know. Maybe it's not trendy now, right? You need like good work-life balance. But for me, like if I am actually sitting down and doing a lot of stuff, like that makes me feel accomplished at the end of the day. And even maybe to a certain point of detriment, maybe I should be working smarter, not harder. But yeah, that's kind of my approach today.
So you mentioned that losing your identity was number one reason for regretting selling your business. So what are some of the ways you are thinking of solving that problem for yourself?
I think that the main approaches that I'm looking at right now are two, right? One is start a new company. The other one is acquire a company, right? Like, but basically it's like get back into the CEO game somehow. I think it's not like the point is that it doesn't, like when you have four different values compromised, you can't find a solution to one of them at a time, right? Like you need to kind of solve it in a cohesive manner. And so there are very few things in life that will impact this many values all at once. And, I've looked at, for example, like volunteer, right? Like, so I run a lot. A couple of the members of my running group are joining this group called Achilles right now. Achilles are the people that run alongside disabled athletes and marathons and things like this, right? So like if you, like I did the New York City Marathon in November and you're running and there will be kind of along the right-hand side, there will be like, for example, a blind runner and they will have like a tether connecting their hand to the hand of an Achilles runner and then they run together and they're able to kind of complete a marathon as a result. And so I see like volunteering opportunities like this and other stuff, which I think could address like one or two maybe values, but nothing really hits like all of them at the same time without, I have a hard time answering specifically because it's like, it's owner, founder, CEO. There's like this like weird trifecta, right? Like if I was hired as a CEO of some PE roll up, right? Like it probably wouldn't hit that trifecta, right? Like, maybe owner CEO, maybe CEO founder, right? Like there's some 2 out of 3 necessary there. And so I'm looking at all that. I think part of the big forcing function is that one of the values is kind of the money side of things, right? Like I think it's written down in the list as wealth. But one of the big learnings also was I don't care so much about wealth, right? Like, yes, it would be nice to have $25 million sitting in an account, spinning off interest, right? But I care actually a lot more about cash flows, right? So I care a lot more about a business. Like the whole reason I want $25 million in a bank account is so it spits off the interest, right? Like, so it means that you don't actually care about the 25 million, you care about the interest, which is cash flows, right? And so having the business that can kind of offer me those cash flows is, I think, important. Like I grew up, I wouldn't say like poor or wanting or anything like that, right? But also there were very clear things of like, well, we can't afford this, we can't afford this, right, et cetera. For a while, prior to selling the company, I'd gotten to a point of even like you go to, the grocery store And I would stop looking at prices of like cherries, right? Like I'm like, I want cherries, I'm gonna buy cherries. I'm not talking about like the people that go out and buy Lamborghinis and whatever they want, right? I'm like, I would go out and I would buy cherries without looking at the price because I wanted cherries. And now I'm like, I'm looking at the price of every freaking cherry again, right? Or like, I'm renovating the house and it's like, okay, you can have this like, what's it called? The pantry, right? And it's like, you can have a pantry and you can have a pantry that is like, you pull out and then there's like shelves, or you can have like pull out and then there's like the system built into it, right? It's like $2,000 difference, right? Like before, like I wouldn't even consider like going for I just get the nicer option and not care, right? And now it's like, okay, you have to like stop and analyze every single thing. Because if you spend it, right, you're spending the principal oftentimes.
Of course. Yeah.
And so I think for me, going back to this, like finding this like CEO, founder, owner, whatever combo, I think at this point, founder is the least important to me, right? I think at this point, like CEO gives me the autonomy and owner gives me the financial side, and both kind of give me the social status, and I forget what the fourth one was that is impacted. Yeah, so I think that's what I'm kind of aiming towards longer term.
So talking about wisdoms that everyone knows, have you considered actually taking a break and exploring whether it makes sense to detach yourself from the need for your status or particular labels?
No, because I don't believe that that's possible with the financial situation, right? Like I said, like if I had sold it for enough money where I never had to work again, sure. Mm-hmm. But we can even like I try and look at it very practically, right? So let's say I get married in the near future. Let's say I have kids, right? Let's say my partner wants to work, right? Okay, cool. So if she works and living in New York, that's not enough money for us to live on, right? So, or I mean, it is, but like not, at a standard of living that we want. Great. So now I also have to work. Great. So now how much do we have to pay for the kid to be in daycare or whatever, right? Like, if you want a good daycare, like in New York, that'll be like $50,000 to $70,000 a year. It's a full-time employee at that point. Like you can just hire a nanny almost. So the question then becomes, right? Like, how do you pay for it, right? And so, for me, this idea of like, oh, take a break. Like, do you even want to be doing this stuff? Like, I mean, maybe, but like, I'm not rich enough to do that yet, right? And I think that's where a little bit of the lack of satisfaction or whatever you want to call it with the transaction comes from the financial perspective, right? It's like, I could have had that, right? And I kind of blew it.
It's absolutely very understandable. I'm just throwing ideas at you because obviously I've seen enough people in your situation, and I've seen various ways people deal with it. And another way that's quite popular, and I'm just curious if you thought about it, is digital nomading for a bit, because that suits people without kids really, really well. You get so much out of it and your expenses drop so dramatically that suddenly you feel rich. It's very hard to feel rich in New York. I lived there for 11 years, I know.
Actually, I sold the company while digital nomading. So I was doing it for about 4.5 months, 5 months. It was nice, but I'm a very kind of like ADD person. And I find that kind of the best way to manage ADD is to have routines. And, when you're digital nomading, like not having routines is like the name of the game. So there was a lot of discomfort around that for me. And then the other thing is like every place you go to, there's like a new set of bullshit you have to deal with. Like Medellin was gorgeous, right? I highly recommend everyone go there. Absolutely beautiful. Weather's great. Food's delicious, cheap, right? People are mostly nice. There's a lot of tourists and expats or immigrant, whatever you want to call them, but they just don't have good mattresses. No matter what I did, I couldn't find a place with a good mattress, right? Which you sleep on it every fucking day. And so how are you going to really enjoy a place for an extended period if every day the first thing you think of is like, fuck, my back hurts and that was bad sleep? everywhere I went, there was always something like that. And I remember when I was younger, I would travel to, like, let's say Italy or Spain, right? Like, I love Barcelona, right? So I'd go to Barcelona and be like, man, the food is amazing. Everything is cheap. The weather is gorgeous. The beach is right here, right? Like, the people are nice. Like, Spanish, like, I could probably learn it. Like, airport, like, what else do you need in life, right? And you spend a couple of weeks there and you have a great time and you're flying home, like, everything's wonderful. And then you get back to the US, and every single time the thought that would go through my head is like, fuck, I'm happy to be home. like, like there is a degree of, there's so much bullshit in the United States, but it is so much less than every other place that I go to. And for me, I guess my personality of just not liking to deal with that bullshit precludes, I think, a long-term digital nomad lifestyle. I would say in the last 12 months, I have been away from home probably at least half of it. So I'm borderline digital nomading, but it's because I'm back and forth between like Germany and New York. But even there, right, where like I'm going to the same spot in Germany every time, right, to the same town where I know some people, etc. You know, I even know where to go running now, right? Because I've run so much around the town that I know where I am. I don't need like a map or anything. It's not the same. It doesn't fit as well. And I think in particular for me in New York is that I am very, very, very lucky to have figured out like a place that really suits me. And it's not even New York, right? It's specifically Manhattan. Right? Like I left Manhattan in 2020. I've been living in Brooklyn and I'm moving back now, like once the renovation is completed, because it's like there's just something there that does it for me. And I don't get it anywhere else, right? Like, you know, it's
I totally understand. Your happy place.
yeah, it's small things, right? Like you cross Second Avenue, right? And you forget that you're crossing Second Avenue because you're listening to a podcast or whatever and you're walking. And you look to the right and you just see the Chrysler building there, right? And it's just these like weird little moments of like, you know, like I am here. Like, yeah, New York has all of its problems, right? Like anyone who's lived here knows. But yeah, it is an amazing place to be. And I'm very grateful to have just stumbled across it at, you know, a fairly young age. And I hope that I continue to enjoy it into the future.
So what's your plan now?
My plan is either like keep trying to build new things, right? Like I have been building things and they've mostly not been working, or keep trying to look at acquisitions, right? Which I'm doing regularly and, you know, trying to find kind of a path forward there. You know, and it's a mixture of trying to build networks, right? Like, so like everyone else, I have my own idea around AI that, you know, who doesn't? So I have some ideas around AI, right? But like, I don't like, I'm technical enough to write some code, but not technical enough to like build my own AI product. So like trying to find a co-founder for that maybe, right? Or, you know, I also have some ideas around what I would call like a cockroach operating company, right? Of like, how do you take small SaaS businesses that are being run inefficiently and run them much better under an operating umbrella, right? Which would need financial partners, right? So I don't know. I'm looking at a lot of things, and I think that the big thing I'm trying to get right now is like figure out how to focus better, right? Because I'm trying to do too many things at once. But yeah, that's the professional side. And then personally, I guess I'm just trying to get this damn house construction finished and get moved into it. Like I'm so excited. It's you know, the first time in my life I'll be living in a near new apartment, co-op, whatever, and you know, that's built largely to my standards, and that's you know, and you know, in a great neighborhood. So yeah, just looking forward to that right now.
So tell me, how did your exit affect your relationships with your partner, first of all, but also the rest of your family?
Family, it was kind of like a like they're proud of me and they're happy for me, right? But in general, like I have a very supporting and loving family. I think I'm very, very fortunate in that sense. Um, I think that that was all fine. I think I'm also pretty lucky in the sense that, like, while we started off not having much when we immigrated to the US,
Mm-hmm.
everyone has kind of earned their own money at this point and in, fairly sizable amounts. So I don't have, the problem of like
Mm-hmm.
being so rich that, people are coming to me and being like, oh, can you buy me a house type of thing, right? Because like everyone has bought their own houses, right? Like everyone's doing well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have any problem of like that type of stuff, which I know happens to some founders. Friends, everyone has been mostly cool about it. There have been limited exceptions, which I cannot talk about. And then my partner, well, the person I was dating at the time that I sold the company, I'm no longer dating, but it was not related to the sale of the company. She supported me kind of when I went through with it. And I kind of wish she'd pushed back more, but it's fine. And yeah, now I'm dating someone else and yeah, everything's going great. So I would say that for me, the sale impacted me individually a lot more than it impacted kind of anyone in my life.
What are the good things that came out of the sale?
It's tough for me to like. I mean, to some degree, right? Like, is wealth, right? Like, it's hard to argue with the fact that you have a certain amount of money. I would say probably the biggest one right now is that it has given me access to certain communities, right? Like the one you and I are in, a couple others that I'm in, and that has given me an access to a network almost. It's not really a network, right? Like it's like I'm not like friend, like I'm not building close friendships with anyone yet, right? But I hope to build kind of more acquaintances and relationships with people in these communities. They are on average much more intelligent than I am and much more experienced than I am. And I think that having kind of those relationships is just a force multiplier for what I can do in the future. Like I didn't go to Harvard, right? I didn't grow up rich. I didn't, I wasn't an early employee at like PayPal or whatever, one of these like mafia type situations that we talk about in tech. And so, finding a community through which to build meaningful relationships with people who are smarter than me and more experienced than me is probably the biggest benefit of the sale.
Do you feel lonely?
Now?
Yeah.
Or did I? I felt lonely before I sold the company.
Okay.
I
And
felt a
less
lot.
lonely now.
Yeah. Because, well, it's like, because part of the problem before I sold the company was I was trying to find communities like this
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't have me, right? Like there were either communities that were like, you're not far enough along on your journey, right? Or there were communities that would take me, but they were like, their members were like, I looked at them in the same way where I was like, all of you guys are way too early on your journey relative to me. And I felt like I was in this dead zone. Like, I mean, I wish I could be in the communities I'm in now prior to having sold my company, because I definitely wouldn't have, like, that would have made things a lot easier and
Now you
better.
earned your ticket.
Yeah, but yeah,
One good thing that
I
came
paid
out
in
of the
blood.
sale. You mentioned you are not looking to build friendships in these communities. Why is
No, no,
that?
no. I would love to build friendships. I'm just saying, like, that's not,
It's
it's
not an
tough to,
expectation. Yeah.
yeah, it's not an expectation. It's like the people in these communities, like their number one thing that they have at this point that they care about is time, right? Like most of the people are very, very sensitive about their time, right? So, for example, again, in the community that you and I are in, there is a person who's in the New York group where I've invited them to come running with with the running club that I run in, right? And this is a way that like he can kind of get his exercise in, and at the same time I can like work to build a network. But it's tough to just be like, oh, hey, person XYZ, like come to my barbecue, right? Or like something like that. And so I think that it's good if you can build friendships, right? But you should start by like trying to build acquaintances first
Okay.
and then
Makes sense.
just try and be helpful to them with whatever problems they have in their lives, right? And like let the friendships naturally evolve rather than trying to just, be very calculated around that.
Okay, so this dissatisfaction you feel, how do you channel it? Where do you channel it if you do?
I'm very much like in the camp of people that use negative emotions as fuel for what I do. So I'm not sitting here like saying like, well, my life is bad. I mean, there are days, right, where like I'm down, but generally like right now, right, like we're having this conversation. I can feel the emotions as I'm talking through these things, and I'm like, I'm dissatisfied with what I've done, with what I've achieved, and like I'm like, I want more. And it's not a hindrance. It's like the fuel in the engine that's like, okay, you want more, go get it, right? Like, and so I think that's a lot of what's driving my hunger and the constant action that I'm taking around, whether it's the things I'm building or the topics I'm researching or the people I'm connecting with, or whatever I'm working on in my spare time, right? Like that's a key part of that.
So on a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate your level of fulfillment at the moment?
I don't know, maybe a 6.5.
That's
Like
not bad.
it's not terrible, right? Like again, like good family, good life, good health, right? What is it that the New Year's Eve thing, like wishing you health, wealth, and something else? I forget, but like I have all the good things, right? Like I'm just greedy and I want more.
I can see that. That's okay. Do you have a sense of purpose?
No, not really. Not beyond this kind of very personal sense of purpose, in the sense that like I want to have, a healthy family, right? Like I want to have physical health, right? Like these things actually matter to me. And, after we record this interview, like I'm going to go run 9 miles. And I have these kind of things that are important to me that I've spent a lot of time on. And yeah, I think that's as close to purpose as I am today. But even like as I look at the things that I'm considering building next, I definitely weigh some ideas above others because they come with a purpose opportunity, right? Like I said earlier, my last company was like, we did it for the money, right? We weren't like saving anyone's life or, like making families stronger or, whatever. Like, but like one of my ideas is it's this thing I call family time, which is FaceTime, but built specifically for families, right? So with special features that are just for families. So I call my grandmother every day. She will answer on FaceTime, and some percentage of the time she'll answer in audio only mode. And then I have to be like, okay, grandma, you need to press the camera icon, which is the middle button, third from the left or third from the right. Like you need to press that, right? It takes 5 minutes for her to like get like, both because she has to find it on the screen, process that information, like her hand is shaking, right? It's tough to press the button, etc. And I'm like, why can't I just enable the camera for her? And I get that there's answers around like privacy, etc., right? And that's why this shouldn't be a thing in a general purpose tool like FaceTime. But then what I'm getting at is that if I were to build this communication platform focused specifically on connecting family members, more and I have some ideas of like how to make it more valuable, blah blah. But like that has an actual meaning to it, right? That has a purpose. I can say that like, hey, we've facilitated over 1 million hours of, family conversations that wouldn't have happened otherwise, right? Like, and I think that some ideas would grant me more purpose than others, right? Like I have an idea around forms for the web, right? Like are forms for the web really going to change the world? Like probably not, right? The money will be better, but it's not going to change anything. But I do consider kind of the purpose element of a given idea in terms of how it can impact my life when I'm picking amongst things I consider working on.
We talked about it offline, how I find that exited founders who are not parents surprisingly handle the whole post-exit crisis differently. And it's often much harder for them because children actually give us so much meaning and they stabilize us so much. So I can feel it in our conversation now as well, that you don't really have that stabilizing factor of your own family yet. I know you're working on it, so hopefully you'll experience that soon, and it will help you as well.
Yeah, it's I can hear my mom and grandma right now.
I know, I'm sorry, I sound like them, but it is so true. Like every time I talk to someone who, just very young like you, and either single or has only romantic relationships, there's always this feeling that, there is no stabilizing factor there, because children restrict your freedom on the one hand. On the other hand, they give you so much meaning that it's actually easier to have a purpose at this stage in your life because they give it to you. You may then grow out of that purpose and care more about bigger community and bigger society, but family does have that, especially your children do have that power of giving us purpose for a period in our lives.
Yeah, I'm amongst my friends, I'm one of the last ones to be not married and without kids.
You'll get there when you get there.
Yeah, I'm as usual, I'm a little slower than everyone else, but working on it.
It's just harder to exit the company and deal with it without that stabilizing factor. How do you want to be remembered?
I don't think I'm anything special, right? Like loving husband, good father, right? Good son. I don't have a particular like desire to be like, world renowned, philanthropist, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, if it happens, it happens, right? But I think realistically, if I were just to be a, good enough husband, father, son, whatever, friend to the people in my life, that would be number one. And number two is that, with whatever I build next, part of what I care about is like what I call the playground, right? Like I want to create a work playground where I don't want it to be this like super professional thing. And that's kind of like why I in part regret selling this like cash flowing business, is because there was enough cash flow where I could have just hired a CEO and then taken that cash flow and gone and hired, 2 developers, a designer, a marketing person, and it would have been like us in an office having our own like fun time building random shit, and like just it would have been fun, right? Like it would have been less of a business and more of like an entertainment. And if I can create that for myself, that'd be great. And if I can create that for others, I think it would also be great. This is kind of like where my interest in like venture studios and then this type of models are kind of also interesting to me.
So it does sound like you're channeling your sadness in the right direction. You obviously have this amazing experience. You have all the talents in the world. And I'm absolutely sure your next business will be as huge as you want it to be.
We'll see.
And we'll talk about your next...
Most likely my next one will fail, right? But the next successful one hopefully will be.
Exactly. It's okay. They can fail first, but I'm sure you have a very bright future in front of you.
Hopefully. Knock on wood.
Absolutely. And let's talk in a couple of years. By that time, you will have sold your super successful business.
There you go. Sounds good.
Boris, thank you so much. This was very interesting. I really hope you feel better and you find that cash flow in business and your new identity again.
Yeah, I was just like, if someone's listening, right, and they're like, oh, I have a cash flowing business that I don't think I'll regret selling, then maybe they should reach out to me. Or, if someone's looking for a co-founder or something like that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very easy to find on the internet.
So you have a wonderful trip to Germany.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me know next time you're in New York.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Boris.
See you. Have a good day.